Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer and this is Project Kids and this is summer camp day number 3. Michael Wan is with me. We have both just returned from some interesting travels. So we're going to kind of reconnect here and see what kind of interesting crossovers, mirrors, and reflections we've had through our experiences over the last couple of weeks. And then when we're done sort of with our tango, then we will move to the workshop section. And we have the group here with us today. They're going to be listening in during the first hour, and then they'll participate in the rest. And I'm glad more people have kind of decided to join us on this adventure. But we also just wanted to kind of put it out there for people that I've had a lot of people interested in what we're doing, but aren't really sure if they have right now the time or the ability to participate like with full sort of energy. And at first we're kind of feeling our way through this as we go and kind of thought we really only wanted to have people who could participate fully involved from the get-go. But actually we've decided, I think it's okay for some people to sort of observe and see what's going on here and participate at the level they can. And then if they feel like they can kind of come in with further energy later, then that's great. So if you would like to join up with this, but we're afraid about the level of time commitment, feel free to contact me. I'll let you know how you do that. And you can kind of enter at your own pace. And when you feel like your time to jump in, then that we can work with that as well. So just wanted to let people know about that, that's kind of now open to anybody who really has a genuine interest in what we're doing here. All right, Michael, how you doing?
I am doing well. I'm very excited to be here because so much weird stuff has been happening. And this is a place where I could talk about it with you and hear the weird stuff about you, and being in an audience of other people like, yeah, I've seen the weird stuff too. And what I'm realizing is that when you're not the only one noticing the weird stuff, when you are around a community of other folks who are like, yeah, I'm noticing it's getting weirder and weirder, then it's not so weird as much as it's like, okay, this is the normal. And then this is how we're like literally navigating through it. So I'm super psyched to be here.
Awesome. You just returned this morning from your travels, and I gave you a little update on mine, but I'm excited to hear about yours, and yours are super fresh in your mind. So why don't we kind of start with what's been going on with you and sort of, sort of hash that one out, and then we'll revert to sort of my travels since I've had a couple days to reflect already.
All right. And we'll go back and forth. So let me talk for like, I don't know, like maybe 10 minutes, and then I'll just stop wherever I am. So this is maybe about like a month or so ago, maybe even further back than that. Like I did a video or a presentation on just my YouTube channel, and I just put it out there like now's the time to like meet with people, and like, I didn't know who was going to respond, but me saying basically like, I'm open to like meeting with folks. And I heard back from someone. I heard back from someone who I had done a Starboard session for like maybe about a year ago. And Starboard is like kind of astrology, kind of a reading, but it's definitely like a personal thing. So I had a connection with this person, but I mean, and I knew them through like Instagram, I suppose, like, there's, I follow them, they follow me and so forth, but there really wasn't much more than that. And this person, they wrote back, they're like, hey, me and my husband, we've got like a small little place down in New Mexico, and we got a small little place in Pennsylvania. And we split the year between the two. And, I've been following along on yours and Jenny's ride, and like, would you be interested in maybe coming up? We're in the process of building an earth house, and like, you can participate and all sorts of stuff like that. And that's like as much as I really knew. Like, there wasn't anything more than that. And we're like, I'm like, yeah, let's go for it. And so that was this weekend, like going to this person's place and not really having any sort of, expectation of like really who and what we're stepping into, other than, that little bit of what we have shared before and a willingness to do so. So it turned out to be just like a spectacular trip on like so many different levels. But what I want to like maybe begin the discussion is some of the weird synchronicities. I'm going to bring up two of them. So the first one is, and this ties in to what we do here, and so I guess specifically even like the whole like the summer camp theme, because you and I have talked about quite a few times the our own summer camp experiences, and I think it was like last time we were together, maybe 2 times together. Jenny and I and the girls came back from a camping trip in Thurmont, Maryland, like right by like where Camp David is, and I said like, you know, we got kind of lost in a way because we had to go to some store, and it drove us, the GPS machine drove us right through the camp, which you and I talked about, Camp Airy. And so when Jenny and I get to the place where we went to this weekend, Krista and Zach were our hosts, I guess, if you will. And Zach was telling me, he was like, oh yeah, man, I went to Camp Airy too. I'm like, what? And so, and he grew up in like in like the Philadelphia area, and it was really, really like satisfying for me, because it's like I've got ideas in my head. Like I was at this camp only once from like the summer between second and third grade, but he was maybe 10 years younger than me, and he went later in life, so it was much, much closer to like, you know, the present time. So he was able to go and like explain things, like, you know, clarify some things in my memory. But there was this really, really like tangible connection, like, you know, for whatever like that camp was. But to be able to have that connection, like of the randomness of you know, the randomness of what we're experiencing right now, to have that sort of like as like something a pin which there's a connection around. So there was that, which felt very very much at home. But then here was the second thing, which was really friggin' weird, because like I like the synchronicities, we like the coincidences, but then I also like to put in the context, like, you know, well, you know, a broken clock is right twice a day, you know. So it's like, you know, how do we go and we really differentiate or really understand like the rarity or the unusualness of the synchronicity or the coincidence. And so this one, we could do a little bit of the numbers, I suppose. But to back up, one of the things which Jenny and I like to do is I made reference to the Starboard. And the Starboard is really like a piece of art I made. It's a model of the heavens, of the zodiac. And I think the story I'm going to tell you is interesting because I know where you were, and there was an astrological flavor with that as well. But what we do with the Starboard is we create a model, like a reflection of like what's happening in the heavens down on the Starboard. It's like a map. It's like a play. It's like a game board. And I have different stones which represent the different planets, and you put them in relative relationship from what, you know, supposedly that is going on in the heavens. And so it's this kind of like ritual sort of thing, and we tend to do it on a regular basis, Jenny and I do, as it relates to the quarters of the moon. So it's like, it's a nice, like, kind of like way of just like, whatever's going on, we do that. We drink cacao, and just kind of like, you know, it gives us a grounding point amongst what's going on in life. And what we also do is we pick 2 cards. We have like 2 different decks, if you will. And like every time we sit down with the Starboard, we alternate, like you pick from this deck and I pick from that deck. And what has been really cool, just because like I'm kind of like a notebook nerd, you know, I love notebooks, and I keep track of everything in my notebooks. And I keep track of, like, you know, this is where we keep track of, you know, this is the most recent one. This is like the location of all the planets. And then these are the cards we pick. I mean, you could go back and look at, you know, this is like the previous amount. Like, you know, we track everything. And what's nice about that is, particularly as it relates to the cards and the dates, is you start to see patterns. You start to see patterns. And what Jenny and I have been noticing really in the last 4 weeks is we've kept picking the same 2 cards. Like you could see right here. So we've got like one deck, which is like trees, like it's a Celtic deck, and it's all these different trees. This other one has to do, they're just like if you're familiar with the tarot, it's the major arcana. And starting Well, actually, there's two connections. We've seen the last 4 weeks, we've seen the same cards have been showing themselves, and they have been,
Hi,
they,
Kitty.
yeah. She comes up, she wants to play. The same cards have been showing themselves within the last 4 weeks for us, like in a really weird way. And like we keep picking the same two cards, and then the same thing happened. We picked the same two cards in the mid-March, March 14th and March 15th. We don't even know why we have March 14th and 15th in our book, but we can see it. We're like, I don't know why we would have ever done it 2 days in a row. So all that being said, and you could see it in the book, I suppose. Our host, we did it with our host. We did the ceremony with our host. We brought the Starboard, and they picked our cards, the same two cards. And so I guess what I want to share, and like the whole lead up, and like what we're doing here with this group, and what we're trying to explore and trying to understand is like, the two who we went and met, Zach and Krista, like they're in it. Like, they also, like, from their own perspective, are really trying to understand like what's going on right now. And they've got some really, really interesting perspectives as well. But there is undoubtedly a connection, whether it's like me and Zach going to the same camp, us picking the same cards. But there is without a doubt in my mind, and I'd like to share a little bit later on in our conversation in other places, there is this network which is very much forming amongst, like, whether we want to call it like-minded, whatever is bringing us together, but it's happening. You and I have seen it in our own lives, but that's what I wanted to share, or I guess for what this weekend has been so far.
Okay, so a couple of things that come up. So I'm just gonna kind of go sort of in the order that they came up. So first of all, like, obviously, like, this is growing between you and I and in some other relationships out there, but even in this group as well, the number of people in this group that have an Olive or an Olivia in their life, right? Like, it's got another one today, right? Like, it's very, very interesting. Right, there's a lot of people in here with same names. We have a lot of Michaels, we have a lot of Lauras, we have, right, like, it's very, like, there's something here. And I just watched, and I'm not going to get too far into it because it's going to be the subject of Conspiracy Cocktail next weekend, but some of this mirroring and weird stuff is like, I'm having some different ideas about what this could be. I watched a movie last night called Predestination. Have you seen this, Michael?
No.
All right. And I highly recommend it. I highly
recommend
Predestination. And it really warps the mind in terms of, like, understanding this certain sort of tango you have, like, with a certain person, right? In terms of, like, there's a point in time where maybe you were sort of destined to meet and connect, to understand not only who you are to each other, but who you are to yourself. Right, and the variety of ways that can be reflected and shifted over time, and the way that time plays into that, it's a fascinating movie. So I recommend everybody. Mostly, a lot of the people here come to Conspiracy Cocktail, so you're watching it anyway. But Michael, like, even based on what you're just saying here, please go take a look at that.
All right, I just pulled it up to remember it. So okay.
And then when we searched for that movie last night, there was another movie that came up right next to it. And then when I was trying to understand the movie after watching it, when I was, like, kind of looking at videos that had sort of decoded some of it, this movie kept coming up as well, a movie called Coherence. So my intuition is that that's going to be the next movie to watch that sort of relates to that. And I like both these words in terms of the work we're doing here, predestination and coherence. I think that they're sort of relevant to intelligence in the same way that synchronicity and things like that and symbolism are, right? So, like, that I wanted to throw in there. But the first thing I want to say, with all of this recurrent stuff, right? Obviously, like, you and I have been tracking it. I basically, and I'll get into some of the stuff from my travels a little later, but increasingly for over 2 years now, but over the last few weeks to the point where it's getting crazy. Like, I am literally being hunted or stalked or something by that quatrefoil symbol, right? And when I say that, I don't mean it in a bad way. It's trying to get my attention. It's trying to show me something. It's trying to tell me something. And when I start showing it to other people that are very intuitive like us, like, I just explained my whole story about it to Masaki the other day, because he was traveling with us, the guy who makes the pyramids, right? And literally, as soon as I told him about it, suddenly he's starting to see it everywhere. And it's something that he hasn't noticed before, right? And so like it is like it's like omnipresent to the point that it's like, like I think this is what we're dealing with, that reality is so hidden in plain sight that it's all around us and we've just like refused to see, right? So that's interesting. And when you start to notice some of these things like the card, it gives you something very tangible to be sort of tracking your progress in terms of how often you're seeing this, the variety of ways in which you see it, the things that it connects to, all of this kind of stuff, right? I did an interview with, and as far as like, what is this? Like, what does this actually mean? Like, one of the things that I'm really starting to consider based on what we've learned about synchronicity, but also just some other observations. I did an interview with Shane Bales, the runer. I just put it out the other day, but I did it about 2 weeks ago. And in this Patrons Hour, we covered his new video series on what he calls the machine, right? In his narrative, we are living inside of a machine that we were put into that is broken. And because it's broken, we are now watching basically movies of ourselves in the machine, and we're on a loop. And we've done the loop some people who've been here from the beginning have done it 6 times, right? There has been 6 loops. Some didn't enter till later. But it made me have an understanding of what's maybe going on with the synchronicity. Like, whether I don't agree with all of his narrative, it's not important that I do. I'm looking always for little points to help me make sense of certain things. There's a term called sixth sense, right? And this gave me a different understanding of that some of these synchronicities are like, we actually know something is about to, like, so like, for example, the easiest one that I give was the day that Laura and I like talked about grilled cheese sandwiches in the morning, and then I ended up behind the grilled cheese truck after I had even mentioned the grilled cheese truck to her that day, right? And I hadn't seen a grilled cheese truck in years. Well, maybe I've been here from the beginning and I've done this 6 times, and something in my mind already knew that I was going to see the grilled cheese truck that afternoon. So I started talking about wanting, like, you know what I mean? Like, almost like you're building up the appetite when you know you're going to have spaghetti and meatballs for dinner or whatever it is, right? So the idea that some of these symbols, the reason that we're starting to recognize they're so ever present is because all of this is we're, for some of us who've done this before, or who have been in projects, and all of our understanding of how we sort of judge and classify things is based on certain kinds of connections and symbols or whatever. Like, all of this is just starting to seem familiar to us in a way that it never has before, because we've done it so many times, or because like our skills are really sharpened now. We're ready to graduate, to refer to something you talked about even in your show with Greg, right? Like graduation, right? Like, we're at the spot now where like we're understanding that these are clues that we have left for ourselves to remember that we've done this before, or that we know what's coming next, or whatever it is, right? So those things kind of just came up as you were talking, and yeah, there's a gathering of people like around some of these ideas. And I think that like how we, assess who our people are now is very different than what it was before. Before it was like who you worked with, who you like lived in proximity to, maybe who you had the most things in common with in terms of like, you both like football, or you both do this, or what. That shit doesn't matter anymore. What matters is this: who else is right? What matters is who picks the same cards, who sees the symbol everywhere, right? Like, it's a different set of things, because we're in a game. The game has changed, right? And we're also, I think, in a much more vast game than we realized. I think for a lot of us, we realized at a certain point we were in some kind of game or machine or simulation or whatever. But like the complexity of it, and how involved that our own minds have been in like making the game complex and perpetrating the game and stuff like that. I don't think we all realized that from the very beginning. I think it's something that we're coming into more and more awareness of. And like now it's like, holy fuck. Like, this is a really interesting, like we talked about the other day, French braid of like parts and pieces from different levels and versions of the game, right? There is no just one reality. There's just just points where all the realities come together, right? There is no like one reality anymore, So anyway, go ahead.
So let me play with that. So because that makes sense. And this is what I like is like, this is part of what where we're finding ourselves is like, you know, the old analogy of 20 people in a dark room and they're all touching an elephant and they can't see what it is and they're describing what it is and they're each describing their own perspective. And when we hear other people's narratives, like it's like there's something like, which is kind of like, you know, just the human ego sort of thing. Like we like to tell our own narrative because it's like, yeah, this is my baby, you know, this is the thing which I know. But then there's also like, you got to hear the other people's narratives, because I think it's just as kind of like what you're describing. I liked it at the end when you're like, whether we call it a game, whether we call it, when we call it a simulation or what have you, we just know that it's something, and there's, and we're figuring it out together.
Just hold, Michael, just 1 second. Some people who are here for the first time don't know what a quatrefoil is, so I'm just showing everybody. This 4-lobe shape that is at the intersection of the 4 circles is a quatrefoil. And then the inverse of that shape, which you can't see here because there's not enough of them connected and I don't have time to look for it right now, the inverse of it is actually what we know as the Templar's cross, or the creation of a light photon. Okay, carry on, Michael. Sorry.
Okay. So I like hearing Shane's perspective, and I like how you described it in terms of like his narrative. And I think we should all begin to start thinking about it that way, is like, this is my narrative and we're all coming up with the narrative of the same thing, because a big part of figuring this out is recognizing like there's not one narrative. Like we all got that piece, and we don't get caught up in our own sort of storyline, but seeing how they all come together. So I you know, that's just commentary, but along the game thing. So this is this also fits into this past week. So I do, you know, I do like sessions with people one-on-one. I call them Biomancy sessions. And basically what I do is like, you know, I triangulate them. Like they tell me like some stuff in their real life and some stuff their astrology life, and then we talk. And then I draw connections, and really for the purpose so that it helps someone see their own lives in another way, in a way like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that. I was too busy living my life to see all the patterns. So that being said, I worked with really 2 people this week, which what I'm noticing, and I'll take a step back, and I want to tiptoe through the tulips through this, in the fact that I want to be respectful to people's privacy, you know, the people who I work with. But that being said, I've noticed I've been noticing the parallels and the twinnings of people who've been coming to me for some time now, for at least a month or 2, like very, very strong. And so I've come to expect that. And I worked with 2 people who had some really, really, really strange sort of like unusual, like, wow, if I were to read about this somewhere else, I'd be like, that sounds like movie plot sort of stuff. But there's one person in particular I want to talk about, and there, and just kind of throw this out there to go in deeper, particularly as it relates to this game idea. This person, they are, amongst other things, they designed or somehow they're like the owner of a very popular app, and the app uses like this. The app uses a quantum random number generator. So not just like a normal number generator, right? It's a quantum. I'm not really certain what makes it, but it's explained in the description of their website. And you know, just to kind of cut to the chase, is that person's life has gotten really, really kind of entangled, and it untangled. And the reason why we're working together is it became very tangled with a lot of the Susquehanna mystery work, which I did, even though they don't have really any sort of like actual connection to the river or that level. And but these connections are in this very, very real sort of way. And so the reason I'm sharing this is like this app, what it does is it's kind of been described as like the next version of Pokemon Go. Like it uses this quantum random number generator to create some sort of like coordinate system relative to like the participant, and it brings them to a certain place in physical reality to have an experience. And since that person has been doing this, like their life has just been getting really, really like, I don't want to say haywire, but like the degree of the connections and it has gotten deeper and deeper. And so I think this is the reason I want to share it now isn't necessarily about their particular app as much as it is about when you go and you're conscious and specific about, let me go and actually play in this realm. And particularly now as things are changing, like something is really affecting. And what I think what we're doing, like particularly within in this group, is we're doing it in a way which, yes, it is going to be grounded in Zoom. Like, we are doing it over the internet. There is more control of it from us as individual nodal points from our own stories and what we're electively sharing, as opposed being directed by what may be the machine, whatever that is. I like to have more control in the game. Maybe that's what I'm trying to go and say with it.
Okay, so a couple of things come up. So first of all, right now it's grounded in Zoom, but one of the things that's been popping up for me is like, maybe we're supposed to create a real summer camp, right? Where people who like have all these weird notices and stuff like that, where we can come together instead of having our 2 weeks under the direction of bullshit that we're not fucking aware of or asked our permission for. We can have like the same level of weird experiences, but self-directed, right? Or something. But
I think that's what the future is, whether everyone recognizes that that's going to be the future. Like you're either going to go there or you're going to go somewhere else. And the somewhere else is, I think, what you're describing. That's one flavor of what it could look like. And that's where I'm interested in, at least.
I mean, maybe like in the weirdest way, like if we're setting up our own realities and they're playing out in these funny ways, like we went away to sleepaway camp for training for this idea of sort of, you know what I mean, that we're doing now. Maybe we're not actually modeling this after our experiences of summer camp. Maybe summer camp were like the whispers if we've been around 6 times, like preparing ourselves for our summer camp, right?
Right.
Couple of things. So what he's talking about here with this number generating app, like I'm sure there's probably some people here in the group that are familiar with what this is. And my guess would be that there might even be 1 or 2 people here who have a better understanding of it than I do. But if you know about the phenomenon known as number stations, right, that this was kind of quantumly generated numbers that were going out over ham radio, that people who had no other connection in their regular life would get to know each other based on getting to their ham radio at the same time every night, waiting for the numbers to be generated and trying together to figure out where these numbers were coming from and what they were the coordinates to, right? So this is what you're talking about is almost like just a updated version, a more advanced version of that. But this is something that's been going on for, I think maybe number stations have been around for 100 years. Right? This has been a phenomenon that's been noticed as long as there's been ham radios, that some numbers are being generated from somewhere and they don't seem to be connected to military and they can't really figure out where they're generating from, but there's a cult following to them, right? And for people who want to have a better understanding of that, there is an episode of Fringe that's about number stations that goes into some other weird stuff that could be related to them as well. So I think that that this is a modern version of that, so it's worth paying attention to because there's a reason why there's been these number stations for so long, right? Like there's something going on, and maybe it is that we're living in a machine, and maybe there's an us outside of the machine that is sending ourselves clues inside the machines, and that's how they're doing it and whatnot. So there's that kind of thing, but also like this person's been doing that, and the moment they engaged you started having some funny interaction with that, maybe even before they engaged you. And then as soon as you told me about it, I started having interaction on it because Michael called me while we were traveling. And this is like a cool thing. And I recommend as we progress in this group and you guys get to know each other better, maybe through emails, start having phone calls, start having ongoing connections so you guys can see like how you can start sort of not only each having your own narrative, but having a narrative that you're working on together, right? And start building the narratives out just the same way you build out a business or build out an idea or whatever, right? But he started telling you about some of these interactions he's had with his clients and about these number stations. And we got into a conversation about 3rd, 4th, and 5th dimension. Remember that, Michael?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, and we've talked about it in terms of some other things too, in terms of realities sealing off from each other. But the conversation about dimensional levels started based on this conversation. Well, what I noticed right after I got off the phone with you is that the apartment building that we were staying at was called Fourth and. That was the name of the apartment complex. It's on the corner of 4th and Chicone or something like that. But the building was called Fourth and. There was a business downstairs, an architecture firm. And architecture is important to what we're trying to do because architecture is what Ayn Rand used to tell her stories. She based her reality construction on buildings and architecture, right, to create a certain sort of picture of the way reality works. So there was an architecture firm called Fifth Dimension that was closed, so I couldn't go inside, right? So there was an architecture firm called Fifth Dimension. I realized we were staying on the 3rd floor. And later that day, Masaki and I were playing with gematria. And when we looked up the gematria of my name, it said 6th dimension is one of the terms that matched Emily Moyer, right? And of course, at another business downstairs in the building, there was the quatrefoil. The quatrefoil was also in the apartment, right? So just that conversation about like numbers and dimensions and stuff played into where I was at in physical location, just like you're saying her app is tying her to the Susquehanna, even though she doesn't really have a connection. But if I understand your work correctly, the ENIAC computer, it was like the first quantum computer there. So
it was the first computer.
Okay.
So like all computers like kind of come from that lineage and the birthplace of the military industrial complex. Right. And IBM also was founded on the Susquehanna as well.
Yeah. So this idea, and IBM like has all sorts of history of like tracking things by the numbers when you're talking about like bloodlines and races and this and that and the other, and really keeping track of like lots of ones and zeros in a different way than you normally think of regular computing, right? Really across like generations and across, and you can consider a generation a boundary of sorts, right? And so like it really has a history of that kind of thing. So like, I think like and I've known this for a long time, but what's becoming apparent, and maybe we're finally at a place where we can map out how it works, is that we're dealing with certain things from other realms and certain things from this realm, and the way that they connect and communicate with each other through us. Right? Or the way that we understand the various levels through the constant things of certain numbers or certain symbols or whatever. That each of these is like a node or an axis, not an access point, although it's that too, but maybe even an axis point, right? The axis on which like something changes and spins, right? In order to be suddenly in a different space and a place. And I'm going to get to maybe some more of the experience I had on my travels in a little bit, but the big takeaway that I had, I started the first day of the trip and I thought about it all through, and I didn't really talk about it too much to anybody while we were there, but the big takeaway for me, and this goes to all the stuff we're talking about, right? We have to stop worrying about whether something, or spending a lot of time like arguing or thinking about whether something is good or bad. This goes for symbols, this goes for technologies, this goes for like people sometimes, and we have to start understanding how they work, right? How does it work? Because when we're like, oh, I'm not going to pay attention to that symbol, it's bad, the Freemasons use that symbol or the this or the that or whatever, like we're not even understanding what they use it for. And one of the things that with this way this symbol is stalking me, like I feel like the symbol, and other symbols too, other sigils, but this one seems to be omnipresent in a way that is just unbelievable to me. And I can go into some more of that later about why I think that is and where I've been seeing it. It's used heavily in this Predestination movie, right, that I saw. But some of these sigils are like, they're portals, obviously, but even within the sigils, there's multiple different lanes. And sometimes there's different groups or different realms that are using the same symbol, but using the different portions of the symbol like they're different lanes on a freeway, right? Some lanes go in, some lanes go out. Like the negative space is takes you to this space. The positive space takes you somewhere else. And there's so much to understand about the metaphysics and the mechanics of these symbols, of this technology, like your friend, like your client here has, right? Like there's something here to be understood, right?
Yeah.
And that's just the thing that's drawing our attention to it. And so like, and I even was getting some of this from Robert gave it like an astrological forecast for the next 10 years, right, at the conference. And it was really interesting what he did, but the same, like he has a lot of different perspective on certain things than I do, but that was my takeaway from his thing as well, is that the way we're going to pass through this next 10 years, it's like a portal the next 10 years, it's like a tunnel that we have to sort of pass through, is by really understanding the reality that we live in, really understanding how it works and reserving passing judgment about whether we like it or not, or whether it's a good thing or a bad thing or whatever, and really just become experts on its metaphysics and its mechanics, right? Yeah, so, and that's, you know, kind of like, even though there's things about, you know, maybe Shane's narrative that like, don't maybe match up with mine, it doesn't matter. If there's like items of, if there are like artifacts that are present in his and present in mine, it means it's like, you know, and other people's too. If we're finding some that are in all of these various people's narratives, it's a universal artifact that's in every reality for some reason. How is it being used?
Yeah. I like that a lot. The idea of like that being one of the key navigation points is if it's universal, like if you're seeing it in the different places, regardless of how it's being used.
Yeah, the thing about this symbol, and this is like, this one just came to me yesterday and I haven't even said it to anybody, right? I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this symbol, but it's everywhere, right? In this movie we watched yesterday, it was present in a very important way for someone with my background and probably yours, and I'm gonna let you see it and understand that part on your own and the other people here. But I remembered where the very first place I ever saw this symbol was. Right back a long time ago when I was a kid, and I didn't recognize its importance, but if I can think back to the first place I ever saw it, do you know where the first place I ever saw that symbol was?
Where?
Cement blocks. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that people saw my show with Victor Buga, and Michael and I have been talking about this in our own narratives as well, is we're very curious about the materials that are used in buildings and structures, and whether they contain human parts and remains and blood, whatever, you know, kind of thing. And how cement is related to this now, how maybe body parts were used in more prehistoric buildings. But there was all these cement blocks that started really with like the mid-century modern architecture, which I've also talked about at length, both on Conspiracy Cocktail and some other things, because I think mid-century modern architecture is actually a huge part of understanding this reality. But that was the first place that I ever saw it, was in the cement blocks on mid-century modern architecture, right? So it would be really, really fascinating if those cement blocks had an element in it that we weren't aware of. And that symbol somehow, like to me at this point, I'm investigating, and I'm gonna go into this when I do my breakdown of your show with Greg Carlwood as well. Like, you know, we have 4 lobes, and then there's a center point that they don't always show, or they disguise and stuff like that. I think there's a 5th element, and the 5th element is maybe blood, or somehow related to like humanity, and that being like the there's something inside of us that is sort of the binding element, right, or the activating element, or whatever, for all of this stuff. Like it's, you know, we all think about, oh, the elite would like to eradicate us from their reality. No, they wouldn't. They need us, right? Like that, but we don't have an understanding of what it is we're being used for. We're literally being used to hold their reality together, and maybe even to facilitate their interdimensional travel, right? Like maybe us that's doing it. And this symbol is helping me to understand how it works.
That's one of the best things I think I've ever heard. Like, we are being used to hold their reality together. Mm-hmm. Because that's like, you know, there's nothing, I guess at a certain level that's abstract, but when you start to think about it, like, it's very, very true. We're holding their reality together by wearing our masks, doing like, you know, using all that sort of stuff. And when you really let that as an idea to sink in, mm-hmm. and I think that could be very freeing, particularly, you know, this is what I'm really interested in, is like how life is going to change, mm-hmm. you know, in a very, very like practical, pragmatic like level, because I think it's all going to, at least for some of us, it's going to change. And I like what you're saying with like, particularly with this symbol, how that's showing, like, to you, the more you're working with that and the more that you're understanding it, like, it seems to be more practical and pragmatic for you to understand, well, how are things going to change and how is life going to look different? I think that's important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there's multiple versions of this kind of thing. Like, I don't think it can just be anything. I think there has to be certain qualities to whatever, like a symbol. I'm sure other people identify with certain other symbols or certain other kinds of like natural elements or whatever. There's a variety of like things you can do this with, but like, if everybody kind of finds the one for you and starts to understand it and be able to maybe build a story or a narrative around it the way that I'm kind of doing with this thing, and then we can come together and like, I'll know when I see Michael's symbol, this is how his symbol works, right? And so like that then becomes like a secret door to another thing for me, because I understand how it works, right? Like, he figured it out because, you know, he was maybe he's the one who actually created the symbol in our original first time around or whatever, and he forgot and blah, 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 right? And so like, we kind of understand the mechanics ourselves, and then we can share it to each other, and suddenly we have, you know, free passes into places that we didn't have before, because we understand the way the metaphysics of that, you know, symbol, sigil, natural elements, location, whatever works, right? And suddenly, like, I mean, that's a lot of what, you know, the elite who are supposedly controlling our reality, like how they have their hand up on us is because they know where certain spots are. Like, but look at all this work you've done with Susquehanna, right? Like, you're spending at this point 10 plus years sorting this out, right? Like, there's some people who are born into their families where they're just told, that's just told to them, like, that's the story, that this is how this works, just like our parents teach us how the dishwasher works or whatever. Like, this is how this works, and when you're trying to make something happen and bring it from an idea in your head into reality in the world, you go there and you use this energy and blah, 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 right? We're sorting this stuff out for ourselves, and we can start sharing it amongst ourselves as the lore, as the knowledge, as the information to be passed on and around to the people who are part of your crew. They have your crew, we have ours, right? They have their crew, we have ours. And yeah, I'm really starting to see though, how like you don't actually like need necessarily a physical key to a door. You just need to understand how to, and I've known this since my dancing time, right? But you really need to understand how to align yourself with the geometry of that door lock. And then you can sort of, same thing, right? Somebody else can come and make you a new key. They don't have to have your key. We can do this in a number of different ways. It can be accomplished through movement. It can be accomplished through certain chemical makeups, all sorts of sound, whatever, right? But you have to have the understanding of how it works. And as long as we either think something is wonderful and don't see its shortcomings, or think something is terrible and so push it out of our thoughts because we're afraid of something terrible, we are failing to understand how it works.
Yeah, that's a nice way of explaining it.
Yeah. So, all right. So, do you want to hear about my travels a little bit?
Or definitely.
Okay.
Well, can I do one quick? Let me just go. Can I show you a couple pictures?
Yeah.
You want to see some pictures? I loaded these pictures. I'll show you what it looked like, so then you can have an image in your mind, and then we could drop that and we'll move on. So let me go see where my pictures. Oh, can you enable me to share some photographs?
Yep. Let's see, advanced sharing options, all participants, go ahead.
All right, so where am I? All right, so this is where we went. So this is where this place, like, and this kind of ties into like what we were talking about in terms of like being able to enter through or unlock doors through this reality, these invisible kind of locks and keys, because this experience just came out of nowhere. So I didn't know these people or anything, and we get invited to come up, and this is what I want to do. I want to travel, meet, and have these other experiences. And this is where we go. They're building this earth house right here. This is the earth house. We get to go and spend maybe a couple hours helping them build this. We're staying in these fantastic 1950s campers, which are in mint condition. We learn all these skills. We're having fun. That's me right there. And we're building things with the most general, with our hands, with the most simplistic materials, just dirt, water, and straw. And we're making these homes. And
Yeah.
so when I go and I see that what starts as an idea, like has turned into this type of actual experience, like not just with like what you and I and Laura and Jenny have experienced and everyone else here, but then in these other places, like this is what to me, like the unlocking and the stepping into this other reality. And as we're going to go and as maybe Robert says, like as we go through this tunnel of the next 10 years, this is what it's beginning to look like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. I loved how like the fingerprints are part of like what the wall looks like, the decor of it. That's great. I also like, so what is it? It's grass, mud, what else?
It's straw, water, and dirt.
Interesting. Okay. So yeah, I like that whole thing, and I like those airstreams. Those are from that same mid-century modern period in the 50s, right? Like it's just.
That's what I wanted to say. So, okay, so let me go show you this one thing that I forgot about that. So you mentioned the mid-centuries. So the woman whose house it was, she makes miniatures. That's her kind of like online business.
Mhm.
And all she wants to do is like this house. She built this house. You see all
Oh,
this stuff right here?
yeah.
Let me see. Like, and all she does is she wants to go and work with mid-century miniature stuff to put in these houses. And that's what we were talking about this morning, about how much she wants to like really focus on like her next line of what she sells is like all of these mid-century inspired wall hangings for miniature houses. And it's all done in scale. And so when you started talking about like the shapes in the mid-century, I was like, well, there's another one of these connections. And she's playing with it in this very, very different way, but it's this very, like, it's the same thing.
Well, so one of the things that we've been talking a little bit about tiny house living as well, which is for some reason I've always been obsessed with tiny houses, even though sure I can see the idea that they're trying to get people used to like living in tiny little compact spaces and not having all this room and the globalist nonsense version of it. But I think there's something interesting about like just having only the things that you need sort of arranged into a model that really works for you, but maybe not would work for somebody else. And it's like very personalized and whatnot. So we've been talking about tiny houses too. And when we were talking, I was just thinking, oh, it would be cool to have like a mid-century modern tiny house. But you're talking about her doing these kinds of designs. I love the mid-century modern stuff. It's quite fascinating. There's a couple, and I know there's something important to it because there's a community right near where my sister lived. My sister is a professor at Emerson in Boston, right? And all the professors from all the different universities in Boston, they don't generally live right in the town where their school is. They all live in some of these weird suburbs, right? There's a lot of these weird suburbs, and one of them has the neighborhood that is all mid-century modern houses that were created by professors at Harvard and MIT to live in. They're like some kind of experimental living area, right? And so I wonder, maybe they recognize that some of the qualities, geometries, energetics created by some of this architecture creates a loose relationship with time, right? Or something like that. There's all sorts of weird stuff. Every time I go with my sister, I make her take me and drive me around in this neighborhood. I've also talked a lot about mid-century modern architecture in terms of Palm Springs, where I spend a lot of time and have a lot of interesting experiences. But I actually have an uncle who was one of like the famed mid-century modern architects. There's a street named after him. He's a cousin, sorry, in Palm Springs. I think there's something to this, even in terms of like how one passes down knowledge from generation to generation. That there's something in the architecture, right, that acts as like a railway for that or something like that. Like, I don't know what it is. Like, I had this amazing download one time in a psychedelic state about like a message my cousin was leaving to me through the architecture, right? It was very eloquent. I wish I had it recorded. It could compete with Terrence McKenna for eloquence on mushrooms kind of thing, right? But so there's something interesting about this mid-century modern stuff. So I'm glad that she's taking an interest. If she's kind of in here with us in this space, this idea at any scale, sure, it takes a lot of time and a lot of money to build big stuff. But when you're building little stuff, it doesn't matter. It's a smaller scale, but it's the same geometry, it's the same energies, and the dynamics should work. The metaphysics and all that kind of stuff of it should work the same. So that's really fascinating.
Yeah, it was an interesting connection, and definitely they had some fascinating like perspectives of stuff. I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier in our conversation. You brought up architect and architecture, and that you brought up Ayn Rand, and I'm immediately thinking about like Freemason and like, you know, the grand architect and the significance of the system. That's what I started thinking about. Like all of these are systems, like whether it's the game, whether it's the machine, whether it's like whatever. And so the architect is a symbol, as a metaphor, as an archetype. That is like the designer. And so and the architect is it's a very, very interesting mind, like in the real material way, because it has to be both imaginative but practical. You could be very, very creative, but if you can't build it, you know, what's the point?
Yeah.
And so understanding that as also one of the keys through traveling and discovering what all of this is I think important. I'm going to probably, after we get off this call, I'm going to go down and look at the mid-century modern movement a little bit deeper, because I agree with you in terms of like about the transmission of information.
The transmission of information. And then we also, because this has been an ongoing thread for me over the last year, more than a year. And sometimes when we're on our travels in a place where there's mid-century modern architecture, we'll just start talking about other things that seem to weave together. There also seems to be, in some weird, like extended out way, a connection between the mid-century modern movement and child trafficking, right? And so this goes also to what we've been talking about with like the blood and the cement and all this kind of stuff, right? But also like maybe pushing past the emotional level to a layer deeper beyond what the child trafficking represents, to like, is it possible that that could be a cover for something, right? Like we look at like things like as covers for child trafficking, right? But is the child trafficking, not that it's not happening, but like what is the larger context in which it's happening? Why is it happening? It's probably for a different reason than what we think it is, right? Or whatnot. You know, whether it be that like, you know, obviously we know they're interested in certain people's genetics and all this kind of stuff, but like it could literally really have something to do with like there needing to be particular elements in order to construct something that allows a certain kind of passage to happen, or a certain kind of connection between dimensions or whatever, right? Or something like that. So I think that like starting to look, you know, a layer deeper, because when we looked into that, it was weird, some of the connections we found. And oftentimes,
so what's some of the weird stuff you saw?
So I can't remember exactly that thing in Oklahoma, remember? So like we were looking into Frank Lloyd Wright and some of his stuff in Scottsdale, because Scottsdale and Phoenix also have a lot of mid-century modern architecture.
Right.
So we were looking at it, we got into some weird combination of like Frank Lloyd Wright, mid-century modern architecture, the like H.P. Lovecraft kind of Cthulhu cults, and trafficking. I don't remember what all the threads were and whatnot, but we ended up at this thing that happened in like Tulsa, Oklahoma, at like some guy who's part of the mid-century modern kind of thing, like having a bunch of weird sort of child trafficking, bizarre stuff happen at a location there that was related to these mid-century modern architects that also had some sort of set up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Right? Like it was just weird because we started with one thing and ended up down this path, and you know, weird connections to all this kind of stuff. I don't remember all the threads. I think we may have some of it saved in text as we were going through it. Like this is what I do when we go on vacation. We just go to a place and suddenly like I'll remote view something or whatever, and then we're researching what I'm remote viewing and finding tie-ins to what we just saw, and then we're off and down the path, right? But what happened in Tulsa sounded very similar to what was going on in Chatsworth. Now, Ayn Rand was living in Chatsworth. She was basically living in Porter Ranch, which didn't exist as a name of a town then. It was like the area where Northridge and Chatsworth come together, right? But literally, she was living in a house that was created by a different mid-century modern architect. I can't remember which one right now, like it was Newman or I forget which one it was. But she was living there in Chatsworth when she wrote Atlas Shrugged. And quite
right.
literally, her home, which is no longer there now, supposedly, it was you know, taken down there, was literally on the other end of what I consider the base in Chatsworth, from like where Rocketdyne and Boeing and the Manson tunnel are, right? So there's something about that. And she talks, there's an article in like the Chatsworth newspaper about like what she was doing there and why she was living there and why she left and whatever. But she wrote the bulk of Atlas Shrugged when she was living there. And I didn't even know she lived in Chatsworth until Andrew Mishago told me that. But, you know, like that was kind of a fascinating find on mine, because when I was a kid, I was obsessed with that book. When I was like 16 or 17, like I was literally obsessed with that book. And what I got from that book was much different than what all the people who are obsessed with Ayn Rand seem to have gotten from that book.
All right.
Like I didn't get all this like, you know, oh, just be like a selfish, you know, libertarian who wants to keep all your money and not share with other people. That was completely not what I got from it. What I got from it was basically, now that in light of this conversation and in light of the things I understand about Freemasonry from years of studies, that quite literally, like, you are entitled to build your own reality and do not care what anybody else says about that. Right? Like that was what I got at that young age, not understanding at that point what was happening here. For me, it was just like, oh, I can do whatever I want, but not in a way like, oh, don't care about other people. In a way of like, as part of being here, if you are here, you are entitled to literally construct your own reality and then live in that, right? And you don't have to listen to what anybody else says about whether that's practical or a good idea or whatever. By being here, you're entitled to do that, right? Kind of thing. That was sort of what I got from it at that young age. And you know, people, my dad would make really weird remarks about me liking Ayn Rand, and I couldn't understand it because I didn't understand politics when I was 16. I didn't understand that like she was considered far right and my family was left. And so that was like, you know, I didn't know. I was like, why does everyone think it's weird that I like Ayn Rand? I'm like, this is a great book. This person does whatever they want and they're sort of flippant with it and they're not necessarily hurting other people, but they're like, man, this is my reality, I'm doing it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think there's something there, but do you want to go and tell me more about like now your trip? I want to get a little bit of that in our first hour.
All right, so let's get a little bit of that in, and then we'll break and whatnot. So yeah, it was super interesting. You know, we talked in our last show we did together about sort of how traveling has changed during this time, and how, you know, we're going to have to pick and choose how we do it and who we want to be around and all that kind of stuff. And it was interesting. Like the actual airplane travel was not as crazy or anxiety making as like I kind of thought it could be, right? The airport was really no weirder than it normally is. In fact, maybe it was like less tense because there was less people there. There was no weird and no new weird levels of security or people policing you or anything else weird with the TSA. It literally was just people were wearing masks. They weren't even enforcing social distancing really. Like they had the little dots on the floor, but like nobody was really doing them and no one cared, right? So you go in the airport and like some of the restaurants are closed. Most of them are open, but you can't eat there. So you're just eating at the terminal, right? You get your food to go, you eat at the terminal. And whenever you're eating or drinking, you don't have to wear the mask. And so you can just have a cup of coffee and then you don't have to wear the mask. So I think it's incredible the degree to which even the control system has acknowledged this is nonsense on every level, because what is the idea that like the virus goes to sleep while you're drinking coffee, right? Or while you're eating your lunch or whatever, even if it's for like 2 hours, but then as soon as your cup of coffee is empty, suddenly the virus is active again, right? So like that was interesting. There was no, like, it was not any weirder. So like if people, I'd say like, we don't know, there was no temperature taking or testing or any people like saying, oh, you just coughed, or you know, nothing like that, you know? So if people, I don't know how long it'll go on like that, but it's actually, if you have places to go or people to see that you need to do, and you've been not going because you're concerned about it being weird at the airport, it's no weirder than usual. So go ahead. But it was really interesting to go, and we were in a big city and a small city, right? A big city, a medium city, and then we visited a few little small cities, and just to see the different way things were going. So like when we were in Kerrville, which is where the conference was, like we didn't wear masks the whole time. There were some people in town wearing masks, but I'd say there was as many not wearing masks as there were that were. And when you go to a business, most of them did have a sign on the door saying, you know, city orders mask or please wear a mask, but you went inside and people weren't wearing them and no one was saying anything. And it was just kind of, life was almost felt normal there. When you said there was a one weird liquor store, but in general, it was like fairly normal. Like we were able to go a few days without any of the nonsense kind of thing. And that was kind of interesting to have that experience, because we're here in Los Angeles where the lockdown started long before really anywhere else. Mm-hmm. so that was interesting. And then in, you know, the small towns we went to, same kind of like same thing. I didn't see very many people like in Wimberley or whatever with masks. Just everyone seemed to be like, yeah, there's this thing going on, but whatever, right, kind of thing. And then in Austin, because Austin has gone so far left, I really expect it to be like crazy and more SJW and more mask Nancy than you know, even here in LA. But it actually really wasn't. Like, people wore their masks and some didn't, and there didn't seem to be much discussion about it. There was like one or two little instances with, you know, angry middle-aged overweight women or something like that who want to boss everyone around. But it was interesting to travel during this time and to really feel what it felt like to be these different places, right? Like I could be here, I wouldn't really want to be here. This feels fine, you know, kind of thing. It was just a different way. Like, you don't usually consider those things as part of your travel, right? When you're assessing if you liked where you traveled, but this has created like yet another layer level to the game and deciding about people and situations and whatever, that in some ways it actually can be interesting. It was interesting to be around such a large group of people, because I went to the conference and that's a large group of people that you're with for several days. And it was one of these things like equally like a relief to be around so many people for a bit. Like, you could tell people were rejoicing in close connection and not all this, no one there wants to wear masks, or we were all just acting as things were normal, right? So there was like a tremendous relief in that. But then even on the, you know, at a certain point, like, we're not used to being around that many people anymore because we haven't been doing that for like 6 or 7 months. And so that was kind of, I had a couple of moments, and I don't usually feel this, of like, oh my God, like I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed. I like need to go to my room and be quiet for a little bit or whatever, right? Which is an unusual feeling for me. So it is interesting how this has like, you know, affected people, right? Like, there's this combination of like, I'm sure others experience this well, like joy to be around people again. And then also like, whoa, like I've gotten used to just being around myself or maybe one or two other people, right? So that was kind of interesting. But it was also like, it was really like just letting like the signs and the symbols lead the way for me. Like, I spent the whole trip kind of enjoying everything I was doing and the people I was doing it with, but watching the way reality was unfolding kind of thing. And there was an element of it too, that just like, you have moments where it feels like it's real, the world that you're in, and other moments where it's like, you feel like you've just been like dropped down sort of like on the Lego board and you're moving, especially when you're in some of these areas that have like a lot of the combined use things where it's like apartments up top and businesses down below. It reminds me of the Legolands that my nephew builds, or that like we used to build when we were little, right? Where like everything was modular, right? And sort of contained in this small area and had a uniform look to it and whatever. And so it was like, wow, like, you know, we saw tremendous nature, and I also saw tremendous signs and symbols that like we are living in something that is, you know, electronically generated to a certain extent, right? And so just that kind of back and forth and that weaving in and out of it was like a super interesting experience to travel through, in addition to the way you normally travel through a place. So, yeah.
That sounds like a heck of a trip.
It was a good trip.
It's like, I didn't really talk much about like the people which outside of like those who I visited on my trip. I was like in this like north, like real rural Pennsylvania, like in the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And earlier in the year, I say mountain chain, like the Appalachians, but down in like in the southeastern part of the United States. And it definitely still seemed, both places were, I mean, I saw one in the earlier part of the summer, and now this in autumn, but both were very much like people don't wear masks. Like, the more rural it was, but
Mm-hmm.
the further north, undoubtedly like less open, less friendly, that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's nice to be outside of the mask wearing, and I'm surprised. My guess would have been, and Austin would have been very like, you know, intense in terms of if you're not playing along.
Well, it's like, I mean, there was still like that kind of signs and stuff, but this was the thing that I measured by, right? Here in my life here, everyone who is not awake or in agreement with me freaks out when they see that I don't wear a mask. They are afraid of me. They don't want to come near me. Right? Like, if we're either not getting together in person, or if we are, we're sitting, they want to sit far away from me and with a mask on. the only person I'll meet in person and sit with a mask on is my father, because he's old and he has had pneumonia and he has diabetes and all that kind of stuff and whatever. But, other than that, I'm not doing that. But they seem to be afraid of me because I'm not doing what everyone else is doing, right? I didn't have that with my friends in Austin, even though most of my friends in Austin are not awake and are definitely because there seems to be a political division to this, feelings about the virus and stuff like that. They're all on the left, right? So like, even if they question the virus, the mask is an anti-Trump statement kind of thing, right? Right. So, but they didn't seem like they're following rules. Like if the store or the restaurant or whatever says wear a mask, they wear it. But none of them seemed afraid to me. When they saw that I wasn't wearing a mask, when we're sitting at the table, they take it off. They gave me a hug. They sat right next to me. They had a sip of my drink, right? So that, like, to me, that was a big deal, right?
Right.
People haven't lost touch with their humanity in the same way that seemingly a lot of the people that I know here have. And I don't know if that's just an effect of, like, maybe that's why we were friends in the first place. And these people I've known for more than 20 years and we're still friends. So maybe that's like a thing, or maybe it's just that Texas still in its blood is more concerned with freedom than California is, or I don't know what it is, but I did note I didn't have one friend or one person that I wanted to hug or stand close to or whatever seem even remotely nervous about that, which I thought was cool.
That's always good to go and bump up against that, and particularly the travel thing. That was kind of relieving for me to hear you say that. I want to share with you like one last image, maybe before we do our final wrap up.
Yeah.
I totally forgot about this. And like, do you remember the movie Invasion of the Body Snatchers?
Mm-hmm. I never saw it, but I remember.
So Invasion of the Body, and I'm going to go back and look at this because I want to go and I think there's going to be some good stuff in there. And I believe there are 3 versions. There was a 1950s version, there's a 1970s, and a 1980s, and possibly a 1990s. And so whenever you go and you see like the same story is like constantly being reintroduced, that's something that you got to understand about the programming for whatever the system is. So this is one of the most famous images from the 1970s version that this face right here. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So do you recognize the actor?
Donald Sutherland.
Donald Sutherland. So in the whole thing with Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and like, not to get into like the whole plot, but the people were becoming something else. And when they recognized that there was still like an original human who had not become what they were being snatched into, all of like they were called pod people. Have you ever heard pod people? This is where that term comes from. You became a pod person. They would point their finger at the person who wasn't a pod and scream. That's what the Donald Sutherland character is doing. And that's what we're seeing. Right?
I mean,
like response, and like it's called pod people. We got the iPod, we got all of that, and so I just want to throw that out as like part of like what we're bumping up against, and maybe there's some interesting clues and some interesting symbols. I want to go look at that and see if we see the clover leaf.
Okay, so let me toss a couple of things sort of into that real fast. So in part of Shane's narrative is that we're outside of this machine, we're in pods, right? Like we're being like, stored kind of in pods kind of stuff, right? Which is part of the whole like project stuff with the underground bases and the cloning centers and things like that. That's like a reality that a lot of us have been dealing with for like a long time. But I've talked about this, what you're talking about. Like I think you talked about it on the show with Nish. At some point, not having nothing to do with the virus or being afraid of that, we may all choose that we don't want to go out of our house, or maybe we may want to wear a mask because they're going to recognize there's something different about us. And if something bad is happening, they're going to think it's us doing it because they're all the same now. And there's just these few outliers, right? And this also goes to a conversation I had with Sophia recently. So that part was interesting. But I also want to point you in your analysis of Invasion of the Body Snatchers to look at a TV series from a couple years ago called Travelers, where people from the future would jump into the bodies of people that were like about to die or something like that. So there's a show called Travelers. There's the other one that was called Altered Carbon that I never got to watch much of, but it was basically people moving through different lives into skin suits, like, right, they'd get a new sleeve, right? Like the consciousness would stay intact, and it would be sort of a technological component that was attached to their new sleeve, right? So I can't tell you more than that because I haven't watched the whole thing. When I started watching it, it brought up too many things for me that were too close to my past, and I wasn't ready. So maybe I can do it now. That happens with me a lot with these series. When I first see them, I'm like, ooh, not ready to deal with that yet. So there's that. But then there's also, go look, and you can probably, don't use Google, but if you use like DuckDuckGo or a different search engine, right? Look into the reports in the Los Angeles newspapers. I forget what the name of it was. It was before the Los Angeles Times from the 40s here in Los Angeles that talked about underground civilizations that are living under what's now downtown Los Angeles. And there's even some connection between the, I can't remember if it's in the article or as you sort of follow the thread of research out of that, that there's basically like people there that like, and it's talked about in relation to the Vril Society. I don't know if you're familiar with the Vril, but this whole idea that like there's something, there's these beings that if they can sort of make a certain sort of connection between like the tongue and the back of your eye or something like that, they're able to jump into you. I think if I'm remembering correctly, it's something like something gets in your eye and then they're able to sort of come in and overtake your body, these sort of entities, right? So it's kind of, but you can find literally articles in the Los Angeles newspaper about there being a civilization that is like not human in nature that is living underground in Los Angeles. It was literally in the newspaper, right? And that's, you know, so it's kind of, so maybe we just have more of these people here in Los Angeles now because they come from the underground base under Los Angeles or something like that, right?
Does that tie into like the whole thing with where they did the tunnels from when they're talking about the kindergarten sort of all of that sort of stuff from like the 80s or 90s, and
I remember preschool stuff.
Yeah, the preschool stuff. Yeah.
Well,
is that like the same sort of underground tunnels and civilizations, or is that?
So funny you say that because I am reading the Dave McGowan book Program to Kill right now, and that's talked about in there. So that's like in like more like Orange County, a little south of Los Angeles. But yes, it could be part of the similar kind of thing. But actually, what this is the subway system here in Los Angeles has popped up very quickly, right? And even Elon Musk in some of his work is using these underground systems here in Los Angeles, and he's even acknowledged that he didn't have to build them because somehow the tunnels already existed.
Huh.
They're ancient tunnels, and sometime with you, I've talked about this before, but it would be very interesting to go through this with you. I'll detail to you the first night when I lived in the apartment building downtown, and what I discovered the very first night that I lived there, right? And it's very weird. It's related to the movie They Live, right? Which kind of deals with some of this kind of stuff too. But no, it's very like, I think this is partly why the underground dance music scene in Los Angeles is so weird and so interesting, because I actually think that like this is a spot where people from different realms come together and, you know, spend time in this environment together. I've literally watched people come into the party out of holes in the wall from underground, right? Like weird stuff happens there. You know, there's lots of interestingly named groups who throw parties in Los Angeles, like Sublevel, right? Incognito, Droid Behavior, right? Like, you know, like it's whether it's conscious or subconscious, it's referring to some interaction that's going on. Right. And so, yeah, so but you might find some of this underground civilization in Los Angeles stuff pretty interesting.
All right, I'll go look into it.
Yeah. All right, cool. But yeah, maybe I'll go through the story of They Live in my apartment downtown with you sometime and see if you extricate even any more threads than I already have from this one. All right, anything else you want to say before we wrap up the public segment?
I think you, like always, a fun little catch up, going all sorts of different places. I did not anticipate us going, particularly the architecture. And I like that we eventually ended up with underground bases, underground people in Los Angeles, because if we didn't do that, it wouldn't be a show.
All right. You guys can find Michael's work at susquehannaalchemy.com. You guys can find me right here. If you would like to see the patrons content, you can go to patreon.com/offplanetmedia. And if you would like to join us for Project Kids Summer Camp, we're going into workshop right now, but if you'd like to join us for the next one, reach out. My email is in the descriptor below. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.